Okay, and we should be live. Okay, cool. So yeah, once again, I'm Shadow Reaper. Been playing tabletop RPG since 2009, DMing for 7 or 8 years now. Run about 4 campaigns, and I've got one going on right now.
I'm BotBot, also known as BotBot94 or just Bot. I've been playing tabletop RPGs for 7 years now, and I've been DMing pretty much since I started. I initially got into it when a friend of mine showed me their copy of the Player's Handbook, and ever since then, I've just been like the DM of my groups. I have currently 2 campaigns going on right now. I've finished a little, I think 2 or 3.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Cool. So we'll start with 2 common questions dungeon masters get asked. One, how did you get into being a dungeon master? And two, how much time do you spend planning? Bot, you kind of answered some of these. My answers are in order. I got fed up with waiting for someone else to tell the story that I wanted to experience. I'm sure we've all been there. And the answer to the second question is you can stop. Seriously, though, I probably spend pretty much every waking moment I'm doing something planning or other in the back of my brain. Sometimes the Brownian motion of thoughts in my head collide and make something good that I write down. But I'm always thinking about it, during my lunch break while I'm mindlessly, doing a task, mowing the lawn or something like that. I'd say I put in about 5 to 6 hours of planning for each hour of game time. Most people don't go that far, but I do. What about you, Bot?
I'm in a very different spot in terms of actual hard writing. I do maybe 45 minutes of writing per like full session, like 3 hour long session. As for brainstorming, I do similarly to you, and any menial task, I just sort of brainstorm ideas for what's going to happen next. Maybe a total of 3 hours per maybe like hour and a half a session. So like 2 hours of brainstorming to hour of session time. But that's sort of because I have a background in improv, so I have a lot of experience in that sense.
I think DMing is a lot like being a cop or a doctor. Just because you're off the clock doesn't mean you're not one of those things. You're still a DM even when you're not in front of a DM screen.
Yeah,
Or behind, as the case may be. So,
yeah.
on that subject, let's talk about planning. Uh, so, um, and then let's talk about how that relates to the topic of today's lecture, uh, world building and setting. So, as an example to ease in, I'm currently running a Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition campaign set in Prohibition era Chicago called the Unsung City. And just as a note, I did actually use the hashtag Worldbuilding channel to bounce ideas off them. They're a great spot to go and talk to if you needed uh, anything, planned out, or yeah, they actually helped me work out some of the stuff we'll talk about a little bit later. What about you, Bot?
Um, I have a couple campaigns I'm running right now that I'm pretty proud of the worlds, but they haven't really developed much because the campaigns haven't gone on. So I'll actually go over campaigns I've run in the past. Um, one world called Crux and a campaign called Man, I Need a D20. Uh, and the other campaign is an interesting post-apocalyptic D&D campaign called Acheron and the Brotherhood that I ran with some friends in
Hmm.
person. So
Cool. So to help illustrate the process of world building, let me tell you about how it started, and then we can work outward from there, and then Bot can share their experiences. So there was a conflux of like 3 major things that led to the Unsung City. First, I have a picture of a kobold in a pinstripe suit with a submachine gun that I absolutely adore, which I will post in here for everyone to see. And then, secondly, I have a ravenous appetite for urban fantasy settings like the Dresden Files, the Nate Templeverse, and the Aaron Druid Chronicles. I'm sure everyone has their own special one that they can think of right now. And thirdly, I was watching a documentary on Prohibition when the idea struck me. Wouldn't it be cool if a mob boss made a deal with some fae to hide his speakeasies from the cops? That's it. There's nothing really special. Just an idea that would be neat if it was included in a story somewhere. But as I said before, I became a DM to specifically because I wanted to see neat scenes play out the way I wanted them to. Kind of like a book author, except I outsourced the dialogue to my players. How about you, Bot? How did your setting come about?
I have two very different stories with my setting creations of the ones that I'm going to be talking about. Crux. I actually have a map of it pulled up right here. It's a pretty minimalist map. There's a map making tool online called Incarnate,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, and I had never heard of it before I tried making this world. And I found it, and I found the sticker tool, and I just the stamp tool, and I just drew a mountain range across the middle. And then I was like, what if I took a D&D world, a classical fantasy world, but built it with this specific geographic feature? How would that have changed the political development? How would that have changed the economic environment, the social development of these nations? And so then I built, and yes, that is actual Australia. A character named himself Melbourne Rogers. That's a whole story. But yeah, like I just found a tool, tried it out, and then it came to full fruition. And the other setting for Acheron and the Brotherhood, it took place on Earth about 250 years in the future. After a poorly done experiment in quantum mechanics went wrong and caused caused magic to happen on Earth. It was very much, I will fully admit, I used it as a catch-all of like, oh, why? Because magic. This was one of my first campaigns that I ran all the way through. But the reason the setting came about in that way was because I asked my players, like, what setting do you want? And half of them exactly said post-apocalyptic from the poll that I gave, and the other half said urban fantasy. So what happened was it became an urban fantasy post-apocalypse setting where it's sort of like the Ghiblian way post-apocalypse, where humanity has mostly been rebuilt, but this time with magic. So that was the campaign setting for that one, and so yeah.
Okay, cool. So, yeah. So let me talk a little bit about how Unsung City folded out. So when you're building a campaign or writing a world or anything like that, you always got to do a yes and kind of thing. And but you told me that you're into stage stuff, so you know this very familiarly. But you always do a yes and in improv, and when you're building a world, you got to do a yes and or a yes but. So, all right, so the mob boss and Faye are going to exist at the same time. What are the circumstances that cause that to happen? And actually, I think this was around the time that Red released her urban fantasy episode, which brought up a good point. Kind of paraphrasing it, it was authors tend to just say, magic exists, but history is exactly the same until the point when I want to tell the story, which is lazy. And I agree. So, why is it this magic deal between the mob boss and the Fae is anything new and noteworthy? Well, the Fae haven't been around for a while. Yes, and why not? Well, because magic hasn't been in the world since it left just before the Dark Ages. Don't come at me. Peeps over in Worldbuilding have already crucified me for it. I know the Dark Ages isn't really a time so much as a description, but sue me. Medieval times / Dark Ages is the description of classic D&D fantasy, so I'm setting it then. And so magic left. When did it come back? And so on and so forth. And other questions started popping out, and Worldbuilding helped me with this. How do you account for all the fantasy races? What about fantasy metals? Dragons? Magic? What kinds of magic exist? And this leads to my next point, which is that your setting, or in this case your RPG system, will also dictate certain details about your world. Since I'm merging Dungeons & Dragons with real-world Prohibition and America, then certain things have to exist. Things like elves, dragons, infernal and celestial beings, and magic on one side, and technology, automation, and large-scale large-scale government and scientific advancement on the other. A common question I always ask myself when reading urban fantasy is, why did World War I or World War II happen the way it did if magic is a thing? So I want to make sure that this bit was addressed when I made mine. And the answer is that magic happened around 1910. It came back universally all over the world. So you had, people were just starting to experiment with magic when World War I broke out. So they had like slapdash threw together a mage corps, and one of my players, actually two of my players, are actually playing veterans of World War One. So they got to experience that. And it doesn't matter what race you were gonna get enlisted because you're a body and you can hold a rifle. So springing forth from the unfolding of this wild concept were things like centaur cops in the mounted officer division demanding fodder allowances for themselves, claiming that they are their own mount. And then I said to myself, well, it used to be that cold iron was, pretty uncommon because everyone heated stuff in forges, but now cold forging is kind of a technology everyone knows. So it'd be really weird for the Fae to just be ridiculously weak all of a sudden, and not be able to go anywhere. So I said, okay, what if it was just like a mistranslation and they're not weak to unheated iron, but rather to space metal, like asteroid metal and stuff like that. And another world building thing that kind of fell out was, well, what happens with dragons? Well, dragons kind of made a pact with the world governments that the dragon's domain is sovereign territory, and so their word is law inside their domains. And what about magic's role in the medical field? Like, if you die and are resurrected, do you legally count as undead? Short answer is yes. And in the field of law, can you interrogate someone in a zone of truth without their permission, for example, or without a lawyer present? And of course, what to do about religion. Now, so if a cleric of an active god came in and brought your grandfather back from a coma, that religion starts looking really attractive compared to a pre-magic religion, which wasn't so much on the, touch you and you're healed kind of thing. I'm not getting into that. Religion is a sticky wicket, which I am not qualified to handle, and my player characters are not particularly religious, so I haven't had to deal with it. You have anything you want to say on this subject, Bot?
I sort of just was thinking a bit about how I developed how I built the fundamental idea of the story in the same flavor of yes and so on and so forth. And for me, I actually get inspiration from real world history. I remember when I was writing the Akron and the Brotherhood campaign, I remember we were sitting in class and we were learning about the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857. And I remember one of the theories, one of the suspected causes was that the British had coated their bullets in pig fat and beef fat, and the Muslim and Hindu sepoys refused to bite the bullets to properly load the cartridges, and then that led to a rebellion. And our teacher asked, was this an intentional move of the British? Was this just an accident? Were they just that culturally unaware? And then from there, I had the idea of what if they purposefully started a rebellion to end the rebellion, to show their strength by crushing an insurgency that they themselves made. And then that idea built this whole backstory for this world that the reigning people in power sort of are known for preventing this apocalyptic event. But they're trying to bring it back so that they can prevent it again, so that they can maintain their political power because it's slipping. And then that idea, okay, then how? What was it? Those ideas built this story of an ancient evil that was brought about by the end of the world, sort of the embodiment of that apocalypse from many centuries past. And yeah, that's sort of how I built that world.
Cool. Legion Fulminata, I do like your question about alchemy and stuff like that. We are going to have a Q&A session after the presentation, so hold on to that question because I really want to address it because I love alchemy. Similarly to this, if you choose to write a book or make a video or webcomic or any other creative endeavor, and you're doing any kind of fiction, your setting will determine the rules of your world. If you're set in ancient Rome, you better read up on actual Roman law and society. Pop culture knowledge isn't going to cut it when it's set in the real world or real world but with X setting. If you're setting it in a completely original world, you got to know how it works. If it's a fiction story with magic or science involved, aka it takes the center stage at least once, it doesn't have to follow strictly our rules and laws, but the rules and laws they follow do need to be at least internally consistent. See the many, many videos on hard versus soft magic systems. So, for example, you make.
You go ahead. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. I'll finish this point and then I'll let you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, you make gravity half as much as Earth gravity so that people can do massive anime leaps and wield giant swords. Great. But what does that half gravity do to stuff like buildings and geography? You need to at least know this much so you don't make a plot hole. So go ahead.
My mother is an English teacher and an author, and she sort of beyond simply just the soft and hard magic system, like even beyond that, just to the fundamental aspects of the world. Like, she sort of, when she teaches, she talks about, like, when you write a story, if you start it like there once was a young man. Well, firstly, you have an aspect of time. You have you've defined a time as being a thing. You've defined gender as being a thing in this world, at least socially. You've defined having been some past, so it's not like a brand new world. You define it as something that people can live in, that there's a place where people can live. The word man generally is connected to person, so you imply it has humanity, so it's not just purely out of nowhere. So just even tiny little things like that can, on their own in writing, lock you in place. So if you're going to make rules about what you can and cannot do, if you're going to define things within a story, you have to be aware of even the small the small shackles, so to speak, you put on yourself.
People in the chat are mentioning the Hello Future Me video series. Those are actually great resources. I recommend, if you guys are going to get into writing a setting, you watch all of them.
On the topic of excellent creators, another person I highly recommend that I watch a bit is a D&D YouTuber by the name of RuneSmith.
Yes.
Excellent. He has a video on villains, on like how to make a good villain. And although I don't 100% agree with the fundamental idea, I still do really agree with the idea that excellent villains can just be heroes that have a strong, fundamental, different flaw in their worldview. And that flaw is what makes them a hero in their eyes, but a villain in everyone else's.
Exactly. So now that I've told you to do in-depth research and plan everything out, I'm going to turn around and tell you the exact opposite. Don't overplan and know when to stop. One of the golden rules of being a dungeon master is what the players don't see doesn't exist. This includes everything from the exact hit points and armor value of the enemy they're fighting to the town way off in the west nobody will ever see or visit. In the first example, it could mean something as simple as your players have downed the boss due to lucky rolls, but you want them to feel like they really earned that victory. So you say, "Alright," he falls to one knee and says, "Well, I guess I have to take you seriously now," and starts glowing and he shifts into his second form. And he gains some more HP and armor and maybe even another claw or a tentacle or a wing or something like that. But an important thing is that even though the numbers changed behind the scenes, they are still internally consistent. When they were laying the smackdown on him, they hit him on a 12 one time. You can't decide that's too low, so now a 15 misses, because that's not consistent. A 15 can miss on the second form, but that new number has to be consistent for the entirety of that form. See what I'm saying? In the second example, you have stuff like a town that is never mentioned. If it's never mentioned, why are you planning it out? If players don't see it and will never go there, then planning it out down to the local governor's entire family tree and the town's chief export is pointless. It's the definition of wasted effort, and even if they do talk about it, if it is just in passing, then have a few facts you can toss out. They export handmade clogs, the mayor likes fish, they have a strange festival there, etc. If the players develop an interest, then you can expand on it like we just did earlier. Uh, okay, they export handmade clogs. Yes, and why? Because they live near a forest and are good woodworkers. The mayor likes fish. Why? Because he grew up by the sea, etc. And here's the thing, that town that no one has ever visited, it could be anywhere, as long as it is within a geographically reasonable area, like handmade clog town needs to be near a forest. Then it doesn't matter if it's north of them or west of them. They could have even moved in a completely different direction from where you had initially placed it, and you can quickly move it in front of them. Remember, what the players don't see doesn't exist. Uh, um, Side note about doing that, it's okay to have a handful of quick throw-in towns to stopgap any oops, I didn't plan for you to go that way scenarios. But if you deliberately place the town in front of them because you want them to go there, and the players find out, it can start to smell like railroading. For those who don't know, railroading is a gaming term for when you are given the illusion of choice, but the game forces you to do what the designers or writers wanted you to do, usually in a very annoying manner.
As you go to say no, you say yes.
Yeah. The infamous example is "But Thou Must" from back in Dragon Quest I, where you were given the option to say no, but weren't allowed to progress until you said yes. Perhaps a more modern example would be invisible walls in video games which funnel you towards the next plot point. Uh, that said, I have run entire campaigns where the player happily bought tickets and boarded the train because they wanted a nice linear experience. They didn't want a sandbox, they just wanted to experience a story. Just keep in mind what your players want out of the gate. But, you got anything to add to that?
On that note, we're going to touch a little bit more on like the social contract of play later on.
Yeah.
But in general, like just like a quick little side note, sitting your players down before the campaign, asking what kind of things they want is important. Back in that Akron and the Brotherhood campaign, it was actually two different campaigns being run in the same setting at the same time. One of them, the players were very like enthralled in the story, and they wanted to continue just in the direction that I had initially planned. The other party was much more sandbox focused, and I initially tried running them the same way, and that second party was not really having a great time. So I sat down with them and I talked to them, and we figured out a better way to run the campaign. And then they went off and tried to start an opium war. Did it work? No. But they tried, and were happy because they got to try to do whatever they wanted.
Opium war?
Oh, every single time.
Special.
Oh yeah, I have one player every single campaign tries to start some form of drug war.
Of course.
He's currently playing a 19th level Berserker Barbarian that is trying to grow. He's trying to grow his own. I forget what it was, but he's trying to start another drug war.
The example is this whole matter of it doesn't matter if you take a left or right fork in the road, both lead to the same destination. That's kind of what railroading's like. So if you're placing things in front of players deliberately, you've probably got a more linear storyline, which is fine. Just keep in mind not to make it too obvious, or the players will start resenting the lack of choice. Similarly, what the players or readers, in this case, doesn't see doesn't exist. Chekhov says that if something is mentioned, it has to be important. If a gun is on the mantelpiece, it must fall off and go off some point. Otherwise, there's no point in it being placed there. And this kind of makes sense, right? If you're a storyteller or a movie maker, you wouldn't go to the effort of noting a memorable detail if it didn't end up being important. Just like old cartoons used to shade things that were going to move a slightly lighter color than the background. Those items were placed in the scene first because they were going to be interacted with. So in this vein, if you mention Handmade Clogtown in your story, then obviously Handmade Clogtown will come up at some point. Putting it in and not using it is not only leaving dangling plot threads, but it's also a waste of ink and paper, or in D&D terms, a waste of game time. Know the answers to the defining features of the nearby area and the world at large, but don't get bogged down in the minutiae. D&D is a lot like acting in that sense. You always need to be ready to do a yes and, or build on it. There's a reason it's called role play, after all. And actually, my DMing style is largely improv. I don't plan out every little detail. I at most would make what I call a plot skeleton. Uh, you know, you plan the beginning and the end point you want, and you know the major beats you want to hit along the way. There's your spine. You get a few side paths with interesting tidbits, they're your bones. You don't have to flesh it out all at once, but you flesh it out as they go along the skeleton. And if you've been paying it, yes, you don't worry about the bits they've gotten to yet. If you've been paying attention, you've already planned out your trivia facts about each area ahead of time in case they manage to slip ahead of where you thought they were or were going to be. Do you have any thoughts about that before we move on, Bot?
Yeah, that little trivia point you brought up actually reminds me of something in the campaign that I'm starting tonight at 6 p.m. I wrote every town with just a little fun fact, just like about them. So, for example, the starting town is called Willowbright because at dawn every day, the willow in the willow-heavy swamp to the east, as the sun rises, light shines through the willows, and they seem to almost light up, and it gives the town a very nice shimmering glow every morning. A different town, Everlast, is called that because it survived a number of catastrophes that have attacked the town, and it was the site of birth of like a legendary hero of the game's past. Every place in the world has some note about it, so that if they go there, it's a place that's in some way fleshed out. Also, that thing that before when you mentioned about sort of shape the skeleton of the story. One example that I love to give about like dungeons that are important is if you set up a underground like an underground lair for your villain, but the party's like no, let's go to the desert. Let's just go exploring in the desert. Now you have a desert lair for your villain. You can just change the setting, change things as long as it doesn't like. As long as it's not obvious and as long as the players don't feel like you're just moving it, as long as you build it to still make sense as a desert den, it could feel like the party walked right into the enemy's lair. Or you could build something else farther along there and they run into it and they see like the big bad and his army of devils charging at the party and they have to flee and then uncover, all right, what was going on here?
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be just underground. It could be on top of a mountain or underwater. It's just, if you put all this time into making a dungeon, don't throw it all away if they decide not to go there.
One of my favorite dungeons I've ever run was a very simple and very small dungeon that was in the husk of the Large Hadron Collider in my Acheron and the Brotherhood campaign.
That's a story.
And it was a Great Old One-esque dungeon because like a Cthulhu mythos-esque dungeon with like eldritch horrors, and like at one point a party member hit the wall by accident and it cut it open, revealing an endless sea of stars filled with strange creatures, and they had to cover it up or else they would take psychic damage.
Yikes.
Yeah, it was a pretty fun dungeon.
Yeah, we can sit here talking about dungeons forever.
Of course, yeah.
Let's move on to another topic. So, related to this, music. If you're working in a medium where there will be an auditory component, whether it be a radio play, a movie, or a D&D game, make sure you have music. Music and sound design, aka sound effects, Foley, things like that. Is probably a better way to say it. And not just music, but good music. Music and sound design is the difference between a good game and a great game. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by this talk of opium in the chat. Let's see. You really got them going on that one, Bot.
I'm sorry.
Uh, I like to establish a leitmotif for my characters and locations of importance early in the game. That way, when they encounter it later in the game, that leitmotif is already baked into their subconscious. Roll20 actually has quite a quite a large library of just pre-made sound effects and setting sounds you can do. Um, Let me tell you a story. Anyone who's been doing RPGs for a while may have heard of a game called Little Fears. Basically, it's a horror uh, it's a horror setting, but you're all playing little children. Um, and so this setting I was doing was Little Fears, and there was a fairy who had initially approached them and presented themselves as their friend. And I made the sound. I had a soundboard of like creaking house noises and things like that, and one of the sounds was a wind chime, and I was like, well, that doesn't really fit, but I'll make the wind chime the sound that plays every time the fairy flies in. So every time the fairy appeared, there'd be a wind chime sound play. And then shortly after, it was only like 2 hours this game went, but like halfway through, they found out that the fairy was not their friend and was going to turn them into undead puppets if they didn't escape. Uh, so uh, so they started like planning their way out, and I was planning on clicking one other thing, and I accidentally clicked the wind chime sound, and they all jumped up and said, "Well, I start looking around for the fairy," and that's when I knew the true power of leitmotifs. Here's another good tip: layer your sounds. Some will sound louder than others, and some are supposed to be louder than others. A cultist chant or bubbling liquids will be quieter than, say, a monster roar or a volcano erupting. But you can balance them properly, and if you do so, it will allow your background noise to set the atmosphere and mood while your foreground noises keep them engaged. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I listen to a lot of music, and I have a background in musical performance, and as such, I one thing that I do that some DMs don't, but I personally do, because it's despite the fact that it's a lot of work, it's very effective, is to listen to the song over and over again and perfectly memorize where the swells are, where the crescendo and decrescendo are, where you can build, how you can build your speech or what you describe around it. One example is the Rolling Stones songs "Paint It Black." There is uh, an orchestral version of it that was used in a trailer for the expansion for the video game Destiny 2, the expansion Beyond Light. There was a version of that song in one of those trailers that has a very sharp crescendo into a grand moment. And in one of my campaigns, I had that song play in the background while the party was on a boat going towards a sanctuary out in the ocean, and the sky darkened right as the song began, sort of like the low notes filling the air. And as I continued describing, right as the crescendo hit, they saw a siren with an army of like sea creatures flying behind her through the sea, charging at the ship. And when the song looped again later on, I had her enter her second phase, revealing her strange, like black ink pouring from her eyes, tentacles from the wounds on her body as she reveals herself as some eldritch horror. And she was one of the main like bosses of the campaign. And the party went insane. The party was just went mad over this. It was the timing of my speaking with the music really helped to build that atmosphere.
So expanding on that just a tiny bit, about atmosphere and stuff like that. So for Unsung City, I promised myself that I was going to stick to period accurate as much as I could, and we'll get to the downsides of that when we get to the social contract area. But I promised myself that all of the music was going to be period accurate, so I got a whole bunch of 1920s music. It could be played on radio stations and things like that. I did cheat a little bit by making electro swing my battle music because I'm a sucker for electro swing. But I decided the one thing that was not going to be period accurate was going to be the themes of otherworldly beings. So for Great Old One patron, whenever they interact with that, I've got music for, it's called Streets of Arkham. You can find it on YouTube. And of course, the celestial theme is hymns or church music, as one do. The sorry about that. That's my phone. I have Halls of the Undead by Kevin MacLeod for if and when they meet the Vampire Council. And of course, here's the fun part. So, and I was actually talking to my other DM friend about this. The Fae were supposed to be similar. They were supposed to feel like they're kind of this. They look like they could be of this world, but there's something off about them. So what I did was I got dark orchestral music of bright themed things. So for the Winter Court, their leitmotif is a dark orchestral version of All I Want for Christmas Is You, which sounds absolutely amazing. And then for the Summer Court, their theme is the dark orchestral version of Sweet Dreams Are Made of This. And that doesn't sound like it would be really good, but trust me, it is mwah. And the thing about dark orchestral music is it sounds like regular, good old music, but it's just something that's just a little bit off that just makes it really unsettling. And that just makes all the world of difference. And so I just wanted to make sure I got in there and talked about it. Yeah, so past music, we also have to talk about a visual components, or graphical in some instances. The composition of visual components is also just as important. For example, if they're in a port, you got to make sure you describe things that would be found in a port. Seagulls, boats, maybe fishing net and anchor motif for signs. You can use narrative shorthand like this to get them set in the scene. When you see in a movie, you see the Eiffel Tower in the distance, you're like, oh, we must be in France, right? So narrative shorthand is great to help them set the scene. It also paints the pictures in the audience's mind, whether the audience be podcast listeners, a book reader, or a D&D player. You don't always need to use narrative shorthand for this, though. Handmade Clogtown, for example, could have lots of wooden roof tiles and exquisite carving and carpentry, and more than just their clogs. Maybe their bell tower has an intricate steeple. I'm just making up the stuff off the top of my head right now, but that kind of thing is also important. But you wanted to talk about this one. I think your mic.
Sorry, my mic was yeah. I'm sorry, I blanked for a moment because I'm also working on a magic item for the listeners, for the audience. A longsword. A little hint what it's about. Poppy Goes the Weasel.
Yeah. So we were talking about adding visual components, describing.
Yes. The use of the five senses is essential. Don't over-describe. Like, if you go into a tavern that the party's going to stay in for one night, don't describe the grain on every piece of wood. But like describe the general atmosphere, describe, the flickering of the light of the fireplace on the walls and how it creates a homey glow, or add how there are only faint candlelights and the setting of the tavern seems to almost unnerve the party as a cold breeze like floats in from an open window. Use that environmental description to get to the core of the players. Like, try not to just affect the characters. Try to make the players feel like they're there if possible. An excellent example of this is in the opening part of The Hobbit. J.R.R. Tolkien does an excellent job of building a homey atmosphere in the use of his descriptions, to build a sense of safety and home for the start of the story.
Cool. So, yeah, I agree with everything you said there, especially making sure you include more than just sight and sound when you're describing things to people. Another key element to running a great D&D game, or writing a great book for that matter, is how you tell it. As Megamind says, the difference between a villain and a supervillain is presentation. Make sure you go over any speeches you've got planned. All of your maps and NPCs are ready to go. You have all of your monsters on quick reference, and all of your music and sound effects are queued up and balanced. And most importantly, do a dry run beforehand. Nothing helps you realize you've goofed up a typo than reading it aloud, and nothing highlights your technical problems to be overcome by doing it firsthand. Pro tip, I went over my notes for this twice, and once with Bot, and I also fiddled with the recording setup for this like half an hour before we started. That way I was sure that I would be able to get everything. If you're doing an auditory medium, such as DMing, podcasts, audiobooks, etc., make sure that you are slowing down. You might think you're going at a slow pace, and in that time dilation you experience while giving a presentation, everyone's been there, it will feel like seconds in which you aren't talking will stretch on for uncomfortably long periods of time. But, I cannot emphasize this enough, slow down. If you find yourself saying filler words, yes, that's a linguistics term, like and so on, you are going too fast. Stop, pause for a few seconds, and gather your thoughts. Take a breath. I can say from experience that if you take a few seconds, nobody will notice the difference. Trust me, doing this for years, no one notices. And if you take a bit longer, players will just think it's a dramatic pause. This works, trust me. But do you want to talk about this while I get a drink?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm a very anxious person a lot of the time when I DM, and so I always worry that I'm speaking quickly or that I am I'm either over or underdoing it at any given time. When I write things out as a DM, I either have like a sentence of maybe 10 words, or I have multiple paragraphs. So for example, when I send Poppy Goes the Weasel, I think it's 3 paragraphs of description for this one magic item. And alternatively, I have the campaign that I just started. The whole description for one of the characters is, this guy is a demigod. How? I don't know. That is all I had for like a week before finishing up that part of the campaign. The players won't know if you don't describe something because it will not exist. If they ask you to describe something, keep an eye on it, like keep a mental eye on it, keep a note of it for yourself before you have them enter the area. Don't necessarily come up with the barkeep's nephew's dog's favorite food But do come up with like what's the barkeep's name? Like what like do they have? Are they lonely? Like what kind? Like what general idea of their story? I go by a one sentence rule where every character that appears, every single character has one sentence about them. So maybe they meet a barkeep. This barkeep's name is
Jim.
Jim. This barkeep's name is Jim. What do we know about Jim? The only thing that's like the one sentence about Jim is like he founded this tavern after his wife passed away, and she wanted a better home for their family, so he founded this tavern to let their child grow up. Just some little thing like that. Or Jim was a drunkard and he decided to set up a place that he could consume and sell as much alcohol as he pleased.
I cannot emphasize enough how important having that one sentence is, and I can also not emphasize enough how little it's going to matter. Your players will, like heat-seeking missiles, find the bits that you have not prepared and ask for it.
Yeah, one of my
one character. Fail.
One of my campaigns, the Acheron of the Brotherhood, back to that one. One of their favorite characters of that whole campaign was a gnome by the name of Bon Bonson, also known as Swan Swanson, John Johnson, Ron Ronson. Just went by many names, and that was because the only description I had was that they were a magic item seller, like who ran a shop for weapons and magic items. And that every time they sold a different item, they would change their hat and go by a different name. That was the only description. That character has appeared in every single campaign I've run with those people since, because of how much they love them.
Oh yeah, I have a merchant character who appears in almost every game. And they just kind of accepted it that there's going to be a merchant and they're going to appear and they're going to have access to things. It's just going to happen. They've just come to accept it as a convention. Because I'm too lazy to write out a million shopkeeps. So I just have, like, a guy steps out of a shady alleyway and says, like, hey, what are you buying? And just, like, opens his coat and there's, like, a +2 longsword over there in his coat somehow. They just accept it. And by the way, I did shamelessly steal that from one of the DMs that I was learning under. He had a merchant, and he had it was like a blue light was the signal for him. It was like, you walk down the way, you see a blue light, and everyone goes, blue light, and we run over and we buy stuff from him. And then we go back about our day. But, like, that was the giveaway.
Yeah, like, there's always some little thing like that, and I love that. At this point, my players have also just come to expect some form of onsen kind of character, to the point where I'm running a super, super high-level campaign where the players are going to get to like meet demigods and save ancient deities from death. And the first god in existence, one that is currently like trapped by an ancient curse, is the first god of light, the god of the first sun, Don Donson.
Of course he is. Oh, it's the cut my own throat dibbler situation for those who've read Discworld. We could talk about this for ages, and we probably will in the Q&A section, but let's talk about the social contract. For more about social contracts, you can read Tasha's Cauldron. It's got a great section, and it talks in depth about like what the social contract is and how to set it up. But basically, it's a lot of games have kind of like this unspoken rule set that everyone just kind of like works out. But it is nice to have it all set down in stone. So you would So, for example, in our social contract, we laid down. I just downloaded like someone who made a standardized format, so I just downloaded it and changed it up a little bit. But so in Unsung City, it's the 1920s, so there's gonna be stuff like racism, sexism, drugs, alcohol, violence. All that stuff's present, and so fantasy 1920s gets that speciesism to that list. yay. So and opium, of course. We need to define the boundaries of what everyone's comfortable with and how far that can be pushed. I actually, in one of the recent episodes, I actually had like an aside where I do an intro before every session where I do like took inspiration from the Legend of Korra where I did like a radio announcer where I do the last time on the Unsung City kind of thing. And before I got into that, I just I just like in the recording and for everyone I said, okay, listen, like well, before we started, we'd set out all of our in session 0, we'd set out all of our like where our boundaries were. This session is going to push those boundaries a little bit. And everyone has different levels, so here's a list of the warnings for this session. And if anyone has a problem with it, feel free to skip ahead in the recording or deafen yourself or whatever, and we'll let you know when to come back. And everyone, was understanding and they were just cool with it. But we had stuff like agoraphobia and body horror and tentacle monsters and things like that. So you can never tell um what people what their little hidden landmines are until you go over it. So uh, we kind of like sat down and discussed, okay, here's the things we will never just cover ever. Like, we're not cool with this, we won't do it. Uh, here's the things that we, here's the things that we might be okay with covering. Here's the things that we uh, will be covering, and then everything else that's left we will agree to like have a discussion and vote on. And the social contract contains other stuff like if someone misses X number of sessions without a good excuse, then we have a vote to boot them out. This can be now or future, so like if someone gets deployed or something like that for 6 months. Uh, and then it goes on to define what a good excuse is, and like a medical emergency or something like that. Uh, things. It's really like I said, and one of my players actually said this to me. We all kind of knew this, but it's good to have it down in paper, and then we had everyone sign it or do an electronic signature thereof, and it is there for everyone to read. Anyone can bring up wanting to adjust it at any time, and we all sit down and talk about it. But now I can point to it and say, hey, you said you were good with this, or hey, you said you were going to follow these rules, and here's your signature saying you were going to do it. So shape up. Or don't come complaining to me, you said you were cool with people drinking lots of alcohol in our system. It also has, more mundane uses, like, okay, we agree to turn off our cell phones when the game starts, or things like that. Um, Bot, you wanted to talk about the social contract.
Yeah. I always, before I do campaigns, I sit down with every individual player, and then I sit like entirely. Just sort of to ask what kind of things are comfortable with. Things. I think you mentioned already, like body horror, drugs and alcohol, things like that. I do believe you already mentioned that, but that's the general idea of what I talk to my players and see what they're comfortable with, what they're not. I am able to adjust how detailed I describe certain things based on what they say. I have.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Exactly where you're going.
Yeah, I have one of my friends after a session that we checked ahead of time. We were fine, but it was particularly brutal. They have described me. I think what is my role on that server now? It is the master of gore, and then a second description. I'm not sure if people are comfortable with me saying because it's very dark. But yeah, so I'll just send it in the chat with a censor notice so people, if they don't. want to see.
Another thing that I can't emphasize enough is know what kind of game your players want, and make sure your players know what kind of game you want, and then come to an agreement. Then it sounds like uh, this sounds kind of like obvious when you say it out loud, but it's not apparent to the brain, right? So I sat down with my players and said, hey, this is going to be like a kind of a gray noir kind of like detective-ish story. And sometimes bad stuff's going to happen to good people for no readily apparent reason, and sometimes good stuff happens to bad people for no readily apparent reason. That's just the way it is. You know, this is the game I want to play, or this is the game I want to. This is a story I want to tell, I should say. But you guys are just as much a part of this as I am. So, you know, how much, how much, horror do we want? How much action? How much combat? How much puzzles? How much social interactions? How much RP do we want? And we like set down. I just did a scale of 1 to 10 and got like everyone's, how much percentage of the game should be combat and how much of it
Mhm.
should be sitting down and RPing with NPCs and how much of it should be we come across puzzles and knowing what everyone wants from the get-go saves oopsie doodles way down the road when like what happened in my first campaign that was actually successful, which was where they sent 2 hours, 2 real world hours solving literally 3 riddles. Because the game just ground to a halt because they couldn't brain their way out of the riddles, and I made up my own riddles so that they couldn't just search the answers online.
Mhm. One of my favorite dumb solutions to a puzzle that I've developed was for a one shot I ran with my family, where in order to get to the like final boss room, there was a pile of small animal statues of a whole bunch of different types and varieties, and there was an inscription on the door with a magic seal, and the inscription said, "To break the seal, you must." And they had to find the seal statue and break it.
Oh wow, that's clever and ingenious, and I'm stealing it.
Yeah. I have fun little puzzles like that in my campaigns. Things that are, on one hand, surprisingly difficult, but also, yeah.
I actually made a magic puzzle box one time. It was like there was a riddle to go along with it, and they had to like move stuff around in accordance with the riddle. So yeah, um, yeah. But if they don't want to do puzzles or riddles, then you don't include those elements, which is fine because writing riddles it sucks. Um, so I wanted to also talk a little bit about the player applications. Um, so Roll20 has a feature where you can put out a listing for your games, and and when you do that listing, you can make a topic, like a forum topic, and you put the things you want them to put in their application. So I put things like name, race. Keep in mind that the more out there races will be rejected, and non-human races will feature varied levels of speciesism. Age, minimum age is teenager because I don't want to handle kids. No max age within death by old age. If you're above 18, did you get a driver's license? Uh, what's your class? If you're a caster, did you get a magic license? And I'll answer that in the Q&A section if anyone's interested in it. What's your country of origin? This is Chicago in the 20s. Immigrants aren't uncommon, but remember that racism is a thing. What's your character concept? Just give me a few sentences. Do not give me your entire backstory. What's your affiliation? Mob, neutral, police, Fey courts. Feel free to come up with the name of your own mob families, which, by the way, makes it so that they do the planning for me. Um, What's your day job? Office worker, club bouncer, bootlegger, teacher, etc. Gender and sexual orientation are optional. Non-binary or homosexual are fine by me, as every detail adds depth to character, but keep in mind that it's the 20s and people are a lot less accepting of things that deviated from the norm. I also put in how familiar are you with 5th edition, and I made sure to put in bold that it is not a discriminating factor, but it will help me know how much I need to explain to people. And then I put keep these answers in mind, but do not post them. What is your backstory? What is your greatest fear? What would you give anything to acquire? Everyone has a price. What's yours? Everyone has a vice. What's yours? What are your favorites? Color, food, music, genre, etc. And tell me at least 3 hooks, things I could use to pull you into the story. Could be something like a debt to the mob, a house mortgage, a cousin who lives in the country, a salacious affair, an award you won in the past, etc. Something that I can use to pull people into the story. For example, uh, people want to uh, people want to do a bank robbery, and one character's like, "No, I'm not going to rob a bank. My character wouldn't do that." Okay, well, I as the DM see that you've got a plot hook that says that you've got a mortgage on a house. So someone meets you in a shady alleyway and says, "Hey, man, uh, you got a mortgage by a company that we own or have influence on. Be a shame if someone called in a month's rent right away. But if you go on this job and you do it, we'll wipe away next month's rent so you don't have to pay it." Uh, so stuff like that, you can pull people in to the story and help. Uh, I also shamelessly stole this bit from. Oh, let me. I'll get to that in a minute. Let me just say, I didn't want them putting their backstories in the character application because I think something like that should unfold organically as the players RP with each other. It should never be, and I'm sure Bot can back me up on this. It should never be something where you just exposition dump your entire backstory, and it should always feel like you are um, ready to go. Not ready to go. That was a stupid way of saying. It should always feel like you have something driving your character. You are the sum of your experiences. So you need to be able to have a backstory to drive you forward, but also something that you can like talk about.
Yeah, I always consider my D&D. Whenever somebody asks me what D&D is, the first thing I always say is D&D is a cooperative storytelling exercise with
I agree with
rules.
that.
Just entirely. It is not, at least for me, it's not the DM telling a story that the players play in. It's the players tell a story that the DM sets up. And that it's all for the players. And I have a lot of fun by doing things for my players. Different DMs do different things. But I set up, like, my players build stories and they're like, I want this kind of thing and this kind of thing. All right, cool. What if I made your dad killed by the final boss? Or what if I made your dad the final boss? Or what if I made, your brother indebted to someone that the boss controls? Or what if I had this or that? Like, just different pieces of campaigns, because no one is in here from my campaign. I could say that actually. Okay. For example, the start of one of my campaigns will begin with a player's adopted parents like attacking one of the players for money because they've been threatened repeatedly by this maniacal cult of a demon that is obsessed with wealth, and that cult is run by that by that character's birth parents without their knowledge.
Interesting.
To things like that, and like that character's backstory of why they're a divine soul sorcerer is because a cursed ritual was performed on them involving the death of a demigod, and so on and so forth. I write my stories after my players have given all their information so that they can just all be, they can just entirely be, it's for them. It is their story.
Cool. I completely agree with what you were saying about it being like their story. Is you're the DM, you're there. So one of the things I always say is, hey, uh, you're not paying me to be here, and I'm not paying you to be here. So the only obligation we have to each other is that we're friends and we want to all have a good time. So if you're not having a good time, then you need to tell me. Uh,
Yeah, I fully agree. And
yeah.
also, I was gonna say something. I forgot. I'll remember eventually.
So I'll move on to the next point. I shamelessly stole this from a Dark Heresy campaign I was watching. In order to, sometimes you want to have the players or the characters already be like a well-founded relationship, like a band of brothers or something like that. Or in this case, it was an inquisitorial squad that had been together for a while. And so you want to have some like pre-existing bonds before the campaign actually starts. So you could do bonding questions to get people to really like generate a backstory, a group backstory, if you will. Things like blank saved your life once. How did that happen? Blank, or you stole something from blank. What was it and why? Blank did something you can never forgive. What was it? You're keeping a secret from blank. Why are you keeping it? And so you can, like, say there's 4 people, you can give each person, uh, pick 2 people, and one question applies to each of them. And so now you have, more than a four question list, obviously, otherwise that gets kind of convoluted. But um, get a big list, and then you can, give people random questions, and that generates a couple hooks. Basically, it generates some stories that happen in the past that are now available to be used. I think that's a good way to go about it. Um, did you want to talk about that bot before I hit my last point?
Um, Actually, I'm sorry for going a little bit off topic, but I just remembered um the thing I was going to say before. I'm sorry for sort of derailing the conversation slightly.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I was going to also refer to is the power level of the party in relation to the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I generally make the party. I start with the party relatively weak compared to the world in terms of like it's a high magic world is what I generally like running high magic worlds or at least high power magic worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have sort of found a number of supplements that let me go past the base rules of Dungeons and Dragons to let clerics ascend to godhood or let fighters attack, 20 times in a single turn. Just do kind of crazy stuff in sessions for the sake of fun. I am a big advocate for exactly Fallenata. You're 100% correct. It is just flipping the anime switch, so to speak. But I enjoyed like the feeling of like players looking back on what they used to be. So like say in the first session they struggle against some goblins, but then in the final session they are facing Cthulhu in a 1v1.
Yeah, definitely a feeling of earned power is why stuff like Metroid is so popular, or Castlevania, because you start out barely surviving, and by the end you know, you're stepping over the corpses of things that would have troubled you, half the campaign ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And I like running specific enemies, like say they are trapped by a like a Yugoloth of some sort, like some sort of fiend or like a low tier devil. And then later on, they are attacked by a wave of them, and a single one just casts a spell that wipes the entire legion out.
it's
When that
definitely
used to be one of their bosses.
Yeah, that's definitely a good feel.
Yeah.
Um, now I do need to talk about like a serious subject before we go to the Q&A session. Um, I need to talk about the DM's role as an arbiter and a peacekeeper. It's kind of going a little bit off topic, of world building, but it is also something that's very important, and then I wish it was told to more people, so I'm going to say it now. Um, so sometimes you're going to have a bad egg in your gaming group. It happens to everyone, and as the DM, your job is not to be their friend. Your job is to be their dungeon master. You can be their friend too, but at the end of the day, you're still kind of the manager of this gaming group. So, um, I could tell an example. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to call anyone out. But I had a player who was kind of, I mean, they were being a little problematic, but like it was within everyone's thresholds of it's okay. So we just kind of put up with it. Everyone's different. But they kept getting worse and worse, and it got to the point where, like, after session, they would just bitch and complain about stuff almost every session. And it was really kind of starting to, wear on my mental energy because I was having to, be the brunt of that as the DM. And eventually, like, I just had enough of it, and I said, listen, if you're not having fun, why are you here? And he said, you're right. And he just left. He left the server, he left the game, he left everything. And I mean, everyone was honestly better off for it. We completed the game without him. We got another player in who was not nearly as toxic, and we all had a lot more fun. But it was amazing how the atmosphere changed. And um, saying, hey, you know, I got to call you onto the carpet is never an easy thing. That's why CEOs go to special training courses to, you know, to teach them how to fire people because it's never easy to sever a tie like that. But as the dungeon master, if someone's being a problem, then it's causing problems for the rest of the group, then it's not the rest of the group's problem, it's your problem. And when something's your problem, it gets solved right away or it gets worse. So, uh, two of my players are real world know each other, and sometimes they get into disagreements. And one of them, let me know, hey, uh, we had a disagreement, but I'm not going to let it affect the way I role play. And so I said to the other one, hey, you guys had a disagreement. Do you need me to step in and talk? And and the other person said, no, I'm fine. We had a disagreement, and I'll keep it, professional. And so I said, okay. And I sent to both of them, currently this is a you problem. If you, as long as you keep it offline, aka out of the session, then it's between the two of you to work it out. You're both adults. I'm gonna treat you like adults. The second it starts interfering with the game time, it's going to become my problem. And you both know that I handle my problems quickly and decisively. So, whatever it is you guys need to do, sort it out amongst yourselves. If it becomes a problem, get me, and I will be a neutral party arbitrator. But otherwise, sort it out yourselves. Um, and that's just an example of it. My thing is that we're all adults, and so we can act like adults. And as long as you act like an adult, I'll treat you like an adult. And as an adult, sometimes you have to be called on the carpet. You don't need to do it in front of everyone else. As a matter of fact, it kind of makes people resentful when you do it in front of everyone else. But sometimes you need to private message someone and say, hey, what you did last session is causing problems. So I need you to either stop it or we need to have a discussion here about what is acceptable behavior. And so, as DM, sometimes you are responsible for doing the icky things that no one wants to do but need to be done. Bot, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm I agree with you fully, and like that's definitely an excellent way to DM and like to run games with in terms of like inter-player interactions and things like that. Um, I am what my friends call a softy DM because I am, firstly, I'm pretty nice to my characters. I rarely let players die. I do, but not super commonly. Um, but the main thing is that I very hard stick to the rule of cool, where if something is technically not within the bounds of the rules, but it's very creative and a player is proud of it and the party thinks it's a cool idea, I just let it slide. So, for example, there was a boss, and one of its abilities basically made it so that the only way to get off of it is that they did a successful check to sort of pull themselves off of the harpoon they were stuck on. But one of the members was like, I cast this spell that, like, I cast a wall of force that pulls them off of it. And the description of the spell does say that, like, if something's the way it does, but the harpoon effect sort of, like, technically overrode, I think that's, overrode that rule. But overrides it. Thank you very much. The harpoon description technically overrides the wall of force thing, but it was a cool creative solution, so I let it slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Though I also
saying rule softy, but you do have a firm hand.
Yeah, I in rare cases am I a rule soft. That's one of those rare cases. And that was like, even that decision was after like 10 minutes of me talking with the party about like, technically this is this is that. But then sort of we came to the conclusion that it's not fun.
Yeah. My golden rule, my rule 0 as a DM is that the DM trumps rules, but fun trumps the DM.
Yes, I agree.
So if it's fun, then that's more important than anything else, because we're all here, like, you're not paying me to be here, I'm not paying you to be here, we're here to have fun. So if we're all having fun, that's great.
Yeah.
The advice I wish I was given, and that I give to all aspiring DMs, is, like, don't be afraid to let someone leave or to invite them to not come back. Because you have not just responsibility for what you find fun, but for making sure that everyone else is having fun. And if one person is getting away of that fun, then, sometimes you gotta remove a cancer.
Yeah.
It's never fun to do, and you always feel bad about doing it, but, sucks. Welcome to being a DM. Do you have any last closing statements?
I mean, for me, really, the final closing statement is just D&D is a very fun thing. You can, the biggest thing for me as a DM is flavor. Flavor is the spice of D&D, and I think it's important for DMs and players alike to sort of be aware of that. Like, as long as it doesn't mess with the mechanics, you can do whatever you want. I had a friend who we had homebrewed rules on playing as dragon characters, and they instead of using a tail attack, they flavored it as creating a hammer out of obsidian and smashing their foe with it. I've had people. I had a friend who has sort of like played a grave domain cleric and had a floating scythe, and all of their like attacks were just the scythe doing attacks. So like inflict wounds with the scythe stabbing someone, things like that. So
change the fluff as long as the mechanics stay correct.
Exactly, and that lets you build anything to be what you want.
Yeah, my closing statement is DM trumps rules, but fun trumps DM.
Fun trumps DM.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got time. So neither of us have to go for a little bit. So now we can open the floor up to questions from the chat.
Yes.
Please try to keep them at a reasonable pace so that we can actually respond to them.
Yes. And yes, the homebrew thing I sent is anyone can use.
Yes. Now, someone talked about alchemy and gold, and I wanted to respond to that. So, as one would expect, manufacturing gold is a crime because just like in regular D&D, the currency is based on the value based on gold. And in 1920 we were still on the gold standard. So, manufacturing of gold is heavily regulated for industrial purposes and completely illegal in every other circumstance.
Hmm.
So if you are found out you were basically watering down the currency, people get very, very upset at you. And actually, one of the things I wanted to talk about is that uh, there's actually a branch of the FBI called the Magical Crimes Division, and using that investigates magical crime because using crime to commit an illegal act is a felony. Uh, Duckles asks, prohibition, so the law is actually enforced. That's actually one of the things. I won't say too much because my players are going to see this recording or have the chance to, so I'm not going to say too much about it. But actually, prohibition is not enforced by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Back during the 1920s, federal prohibition was enforced and inspected by the Bureau of Internal Revenue, aka the IRS.
Mm.
So, a something that just recently happened was they got wind of a an inspector from the Bureau of Internal Revenue coming in to kind of crack down and make sure that stuff is happening, stuff is being enforced. Because just like the mask law is going on right now, uh, prohibition only works if you get someone to enforce it. So and they were told, hey, now might be a good time for you to skip town for a little bit until the heat dies down because you guys have been kind of making a bit of a name for yourself, what with having a gunfight in the middle of a clock tower. Um, are we including poisoned alcohol? Yes, but there's also much more interesting things like magical drugs to do. Um, there was one particularly one that I really liked called pixie dust, which is like cocaine but on magic steroids. And yes, I
Mm.
will have to now include magic opium in my settings
Yes,
as
of
well.
course, of course. Include the Poppy Goes the Weasel.
Magic opium must be a thing, apparently.
Yes, apparently. So Edward asked about my story involving the IRS and D&D.
It begins.
I I was playing a warlock dragonborn in a one shot, a very high level one shot,
As you
and it
do.
involved, as you do, and it involved us basically doing sort of like a heist of a caravan that was coming through, and we managed to like get it started, but as we were as we were taking our horde, the interdimensional IRS, not even kidding, the interdimensional IRS sent two Empyreans to attack us. And Empyreans are very, very powerful entities. They're a challenge rating of 23 when an adult red dragon is challenge rating of 17. So they're quite powerful.
Magic. The fancy IRS sends, hey, you guys haven't paid your taxes on this income.
Yeah, and then as they did, an army of devils from the anti-tax legion came, and was a whole fight. It was just mayhem. I love it. It was a great session.
That sounds like it's a lot of fun. Chris
Uh,
asks, what's your approach to creating complicated mysteries in your worlds? Um, once again, this is how much planning you put into it. My thing is, I have mastered improv to the level where I can make random shit up at the time and then later in fold it in, and it doesn't matter if my players hear this because I've already done it to them at least once per campaign. I could fold it in later and be like, yes, this was my master plan all this time. Totally, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So, um, Duckles, we'll get to that in just a second. Yeah, so I don't really plan out any major conspiracies, especially because Unsung City is going to be like after the training wheels came off in their first adventure. Now it's all sandbox, so it's going to be what they want to see. What about you, Butt? How do you do big magical mysteries?
I do fun magical mysteries by taking a real historical event, or taking something, or a book that I recently read, or a show that I recently watched an episode of, and just stealing that, and then
It's
and
not
then
stealing. It's called
it's called
appropriation.
inspiration. Yes, I roll my DM inspiration on this. I know I basically I don't exactly steal it. I just get heavy inspiration and I build a story somewhat relating to that. For example, I recently finished Fire Force while I was watching the anime Fire Force while I was writing the campaign for the one I'm running later tonight. And so there is a cult. There is stuff. I'm not going to spoil anything about the anime, but like there's a vague semblance of stuff based on that.
Oh man, the
anime.
number of times that I got inspired by some audiobook I was listening to or some shit like that.
Absolutely.
Oh, man.
Yeah, like there's that Toy Rebellion story from before. Yeah, there's so many little things like that. Or wanting to make. I made at one point a character I designed a character that I don't think I played that was a wild magic sorcerer where the whole theme was they were blind in one eye, but that was just because that one eye was I think I haven't read Discworld in forever. It was Octarine, I think that's the name of the color.
Octarine, yeah.
Yeah, and they had because of the description of it, they had 3 tattoos: an orange one, like a neon green one, and a purple one. Based on the ludicrous description of the color in the Color of Magic.
Oh yeah, kind of a greenish purple.
Yeah, an orangish greenish purple.
Yeah. So, how do we get into D&D? I think we talked about it a little bit.
We did it, yeah.
Because people might be coming in late. So Duckles asked, how do we get into D&D? I was attending university for engineering, and that's a high stress ass thing. So in order to not burn out, I actually found a local a club on campus that specialized in games, and they said, "Hey, have you ever played D&D before?" And I was like, "My brother used to play it this one time when I was a kid, which was like AD&D, yeesh." So they said, "Well, why don't you just like read this entire book and then show up and just watch?" And they handed me the player's handbook, which, boy, 3.5, that was the big theme of 3.5 was, hey, read the entire rule book. What about you? How'd you get in?
I got into it. I started and I've never in terms of purely D&D, I've never really from 5th edition. I've dabbled in Call of Cthulhu as well. Very fun system. I still prefer 5th edition D&D. But I first got into it when a friend of mine, when I was younger, showed me their copy of the player's handbook, and I made my first character and then did nothing with him for a while until like a year later when my friend...
Don't ever use your first character. Pro tip, if you start playing D&D right after this, don't ever use your first character. It's going to be an mess.
Oh, yeah. Well,
like, my first, dozen characters were just rogues on various themes of Street Rat. Just don't.
I had a gray-scaled, pun intended, silver dragonborn named Corliet Winterspine, whose entire family died. Now he worships a god of death to atone for the. That was his whole story.
Yeah, it's no one ever makes a character that isn't an edgy fuck the first time around. It just happens.
Oh, absolutely. It's just the. But yeah, so
yeah.
At my friend's birthday party, we did the basic rules Lost Mine of Phandelver as our first ever session. And it was fun. I played in that, and then after that, I wrote the worst campaign of all time, as always.
Yeah.
And then, like a year and a half to 2 years later, I just sort of decided to get back into DMing, and I DM'd well this time. Also, really quickly, I can answer Edward's question. Edgy characters are fine. Just don't edgy, not irritatingly so. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Don't go over the top.
Yeah.
That actually, what you were talking about actually goes well into Skeleton's question, which was, do you run any settings that aren't 5e? I've run Pathfinder, Starfinder, the various 40k systems. I'm looking to get into running the Fate system, and there's an anime trope-y kind of system called Big Eyes Small Mouth, which is kind of like What If Anime, but more anime. And then What If Anime but RPG, but also kind of like D20 based. And then there's another one that's a dice pool based system called OVA, which I kickstarted. Which I'm looking forward to doing because it's all about dice pools and circumstances, and you can get character traits like you can lift hundreds of pounds, but you also get a backstory, a drawback, like you're a nosebleeder, so as soon as you see anything even remotely suggestive, you get a massive gush of blood from your nose. You get varying levels of stuff. It's really fun.
Yeah.
But you have to get a bunch of weebs together to do it, because otherwise everyone just goes, oh, this is too anime for me.
Yeah. I had an NPC who's a samurai. His name was Badanka Donker Third. And he spoke in this voice, and he was constantly talking about apologizing to his master for having to go into his final form and reveal his true power.
God.
The power of voices in D&D are truly incredible. I've done some voice training here and there. Yeah. Never formally, just sorts of background stuff where I sorts of work on getting a little bit better at various accents, so I can practice and sort of get more accustomed to doing the characters. I would actually like to shift over to the question that Edward asked a little bit later on.
You have to do it in the accent now.
Oh, okay. Which one? I shifted to Scottish and then
your worst accent. Just give us your worst.
All right, I'll go with my most stereotypical Scottish pirate. All right, so we're going to do the next question in this voice. Edward, Lord of Sheba, asks, how do you as a DM deal with a player who uses technical expertise to solve a problem or base a character around it when you don't understand enough, like an actual chemist or anything like that? So, the way that I handle it is I actually have a character who's currently going to college for chemistry and getting his degree in chemistry. And he tried to he's in a campaign, he played an alchemist. And what he does, what he did, it's getting a little difficult, I will admit. Anyway, the way he did this character is that he managed to use Bombardier Beetle Science to build a flamethrower at level 3 that did 46 damage. So I sort of let him build it, but it would be barely on par with the rest of the stuff. So I'd sort of let him do stuff like that, but I'd use my own DM ruling to sort of balance that. So he also made a picrete shield. That was fun. I sort of ruled that it would be rather heavy, but he could still use it. Oh that voice. Oh.
I loved it. Also, this brings up something we probably should have brought up during the main lecture, which is you could do voices, but you don't have to. Not everyone has to be Matt Mercer. Please stop trying to be Matt Mercer. Funny voices are good, but you don't have to. It just makes it more fun.
If every character sounds like you,
yeah, That's
If every
fine.
character sounds like you, that's fine. I just love yelling like a Scottish pirate.
Yeah. I
Or
actually
speaking in a very
use
high-pitched British accent like a fairy.
I actually use a voice changer to do my stuff. For example, one of them has a spider god, and I use a voxel for the voice changer. Um, and the thing about using voice changers is you have to kind of like you still have to act. You can't just like put in a voice and then you'd be like, okay, now I just do my normal voice and it sounds like this. Like, no, you gotta actually like do some stuff. So when you're doing a female, so men talk from the chest and women talk from like the back of the throat is the best way I can put it. So you can talk like this a little bit, but then you can also throw on a voice changer and now it sounds a little bit more. You see what I
Yeah,
mean?
I don't actually have a voice changer. I just exercise with my voice, and I've looked at some videos, and I've tried to sort of find a way to, properly like speak a little bit from the higher voice, higher to the base of my chest, speaking more like this. But if I want to be a more sort of stereotypical seductress character, darling, I generally speak more in a voice like this. It's rather embarrassing sometimes. It's very breathy, and it has a lot of over pronunciations of certain vowels.
Yeah.
But it's fun.
Yeah. I actually have a like a phrase that I use to get into character. So when I do one of my NPCs is like a black magic arms dealer, and she's Irish. And so I
Mm,
freely admit to being not good at all at Irish, or being Irish. I'm Jewish.
same.
But when I do it, I say, "You're new here, aren't you?"
You're new here, aren't you? It's
Uh,
rather. See,
so
I have. Yeah.
Duckmaster asks, "Where can I watch this again?" And the answer is, I'm going to be posting VOD of it on the YouTube channel for the Unsung City. So I'll get the mods to show a link to it. And Harker Kohai asks, "How did you adjust to more freeform play?" I'm not sure how to do it myself. The answer is that I let my players decide. I said, okay, training wheels are going to come off. After this, we can continue doing a linear storyline if that's what you guys want to do, or we can make it a sandbox, and whatever you guys say you want to do, we'll go do. And so it's more planning on my end, I guess. Uh,
Um,
yeah.
Copy asks, on the topic of voices, what are some good sources for informal training?
Oh, 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 oh,
I
oh. Uh,
do you want to go
there's
first?
yeah, sorry, no.
Okay, cool. Yeah, go ahead.
There's actually a great tool. I'll see if I can find it again. That's got like these pre-made phrases, been recorded by a whole bunch of different accents,
Mm,
and you can like play it and then record yours, and then it'll play them one after the other, and it'll help you like try to, because a lot of accents is like dropping vowels or rolling R's or changing things or like doing stuff with the back of your throat. And so it's all just like trial and error for me to just get it perfect. And I freely admit that my Russian accent is terrible. It's
hmm
very stereotypical, but comrade, it is already great.
hmm
Everyone loves it. It's fun. We all had a good time, and that's the important thing.
Yeah. For me, I do a different thing. I listen very carefully to a lot of accent stuff. I live in a family where my mom's spoken French in the background. I can't speak it, but I understand a good amount of it. And my parents have also done a lot of accents and voices. So my voice, I also grew up in the Middle East. So things like pronunciations of like r and h and ra, like rolling your r's, sort of just have come naturally to me as I've grown up. Um, but the way I get into voices is I generally just sort of switch in my head. But if I need to, I find a text that I can read. So I have, for example, just right on me, next to me, I have Seamus Haney's translation of Beowulf. And so I
Oh
can start
yeah,
with Yeah, if I can
You
start just like in my normal voice. So the spear Danes and days gone by, and the kings who ruled them had courage and greatness. We have heard of these princes' heroic campaigns as the first couple lines. Or so the spear Danes and days gone by, and the kings who ruled them had courage and greatness. And we've heard of these princes' heroic campaigns. As an example. And also listening carefully to the voices I do and seeing if they slip into something else. So, for example, when I do Russian accent, I go very stereotypical Russian accent, and I go very far, somewhat back into my throat. But when I did it for a while, I eventually realized that I started to speak more like this, which I realized became less Russian and more Greek. And so then I started using this for the Greek warriors theme. Of like the gladiator warrior charging into battle, slaying for the hope for fame and glory and legend.
Yeah, definitely. If you, that's a really good tip. Is if you can manage to, like, read something in the voice of the character, like you've got it down.
Yeah, I actually.
Here's a really good.
Yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
The dialectsarchive.com is a really good place because you can like pick. I'll post it in the chat. You can pick like a region, and then you pick a country, and you can even pick like subsections of that country.
When I try to do like a Liverpool English accent, it's very hard. So one thing that I've actually noticed is it's easier to read something in an accent than to just speak it off the top of your head.
Yeah.
So like when I first was learning a Scottish accent, I could only speak it by reading things in a Scottish accent. But eventually by practicing, I managed to just sort of read it. I sort of learned how to speak in the Scottish accent outside of my just reading a text verbatim.
Okay, so let's see. Edward Lord of Shibe asks, how do you deal as a DM when a player uses their technical expertise to solve a problem or base a character around it?
I sort of answered that partially earlier.
That's not a problem. Why would that be a problem? As long as their character has, like, people using in D&D using real-world chemistry knowledge, that's metagaming, and that's its own problem. But if they're playing an alchemist and they say, hey, I want to be able to mix up chlorine gas, like, yeah, you're an alchemist, you could totally do that.
Yeah.
No, there's no such thing as a bad way to solve a puzzle. There's only ways that are uninteresting. If you just say, I hit the thing, like, that's fine, I guess, but that's, or I just roll dice and pass a skill check, that's fine, but that's not interesting storytelling. Mixing hydrogen peroxide or aspirin or something like that, that's fine. If they have, the example you gave was making medicine from for aspirin, or like hydrogen peroxide for curing poisons or treating acid. There are, and you said you don't know exactly how to let them make things or what to roll or how to make a system for it. Just flub it. You know, are they skilled with medicine? Great, awesome. Make it happen. Roll me medicine to see if you can create an antitoxin, or do me a chemistry thing to, make this poison. If you use real world knowledge, if it's something that they could know in character, or could conceivably figure out in character, then just let them do it, because it's about having fun. And if that's how they want to have fun, that's cool. I mean, it's whatever. I'd rather them, like, solve something in an inventive manner than just be like, oh, okay, I guess I'm done. I guess I'll just roll some dice and that's it.
Chem majors that are artificers are always
no. So Edward's saying, my problem is the science at that time wouldn't know how to do that. So where do they learn? Exactly. That's metagaming. You're taking outside knowledge into the game. Now, if they're an alchemist, could they conceivably have, read about it in an old textbook somewhere, or could they have been taught by their master or something like that? Like, there's ways around it if it's something that would be, so there's like fun trumps rules. So if they're having fun, but the rules don't technically allow them to know, what penicillin is. Well, maybe someone discovered it. That moldy bread, someone rubbed moldy bread on a wound and it got better. Yeah, rule of cool.
Yep.
Sometimes you gotta let the fun trump the rules. As to how to make a system for it or what roles to make, just make it like determine how difficult you want it to be. Say, okay, they're at this level, and if it should be like something that's a moderate challenge, then make it like they need to hit a 10 on a dice to do it. Out of 20. 10 out of 20. I'm using a d20s here. If it's supposed to be a really hard challenge, then make it they have to do a 15 plus. If it's supposed to be really easy, make it a 5 plus. If it's supposed to be something that's nearly impossible, they have to do a 19 or a 20 to do it. Stuff like that. I think we've actually caught up to all of the questions.
Yeah, I think we have. If there are any extra questions that
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give people a chance to talk while I take another drink.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we were talking about accents and stuff.
Oh yeah.
While we wait for more questions. So, I have a very higher pitched voice than most people, which I don't like. So, one of the things you're gonna have to get used to is hearing yourself being recorded if you stream it. It's just gonna happen. You're gonna hate your voice. Oh, I have to do it in an accent? Okay, hold on. Comrade, sometimes you hear your own voice and you want to throw up all over the gulag. But you must persevere through it and get used to it because nobody likes the sound of their own voice. As for the Poisoner's Handbook, I know of it. I haven't read it through. But that's something that my players would get more into.
Duckles, I like food that goes. Thank you very much for the relevant question.
Yeah, anything that sits still long enough to be eaten.
Mm-hmm.
But I love anything with tomatoes in it.
Yeah, I like cooking. I really do enjoy. I have a number of handmade pasta recipes, so that's fun.
Edward, yeah, sometimes voices just do be like that, and you've got to just suck it up and learn to live with it. I hate the sound of my voice. It's way too high-pitched for me. But everyone else is like, no, your voice is fine. So I'm like,
your voice is fine.
Okay, yeah, see?
The most challenging
sound of their own voice.
Matt, the most challenging voice I have at least ever done is for singing my Louis Armstrong. Did I cut out?
Cigarettes to me is my dream.
I see trees of green.
Oh wow, that's really good.
Red roses too. I see them blue. For me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Bro, that's actually really impressive, and that sounds like that took a lot out of you to do.
Pain!
Yeah, the most difficult voice I've ever had to do, difficult for me in a technical sense, is probably doing an androgynous voice. Because, like I said before, men talk from the chest, women talk from the throat. It's really hard to be in the middle. Because you got to try and kind of do it both at once.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to do, and it's really hard to stay in character.
When it comes to me with gender and sexuality and campaigns, I have a table that I just randomly. That's just like a D100 of just on the scale, on different scales within the LGBTQ or not.
Yeah.
Because yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. It's perfectly fine to not do an accent.
100%.
Like just saying, hey, this person talks and they have a Asian accent, or they have a English accent, and just say that and be like, okay, yeah, they have a deep English accent, and just go on with it. You don't have to. You just tell them, hey, assume that it sounds like this. Yeah, Magi, that's correct. Your voice sounds different to you because you're vibrating the bones in your skull.
Also, Doug Hulse, you are correct. Brian David Gilbert is the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you sing in an accent? You kind of have to be good at an accent before you can, like I said, when you get to the point where you can read in an accent, like you can read a book aloud in an accent and be comfortable at it on like a subconscious level. And then you can like trigger it with your whatever your voice phrase is, like you're new here, aren't you? Or that's not going to be a problem, is it? Then at that point you can then move into the more difficult thing of singing, which is difficult to do in your natural voice anyway. On deep voices.
Deep voices. Okay, so I have
from regularly hydrating.
I am lucky enough to have a relatively deep voice. I'm fairly young, so this voice is people don't normally expect this voice to come out of my mouth. Yeah, Sakuya, 100%. Go ahead. Feel free to help in the chat. But I sort of go like I try to go as I just growl for super low voices.
Die, die, die.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I just go as low as I possibly can.
Or I go into a more performative, deeper, like operatic voice if I need to do like a noble warrior tribe.
I would say from a more mechanical standpoint, which might be more helpful than just
Yeah, and I don't really know.
So like I said, men talk from the chest. So what you want to do is kind of like, I mean, if you've taken chorus even for a little bit, what they'll tell you is from the diaphragm, and that's kind of, you want to like bury it down so it's like vibrating your sternum when you talk. You can also like, when you like swallow, the back of your throat kind of loosens a little bit and moves back. Kind of try to like hold that back, and you can actually talk a little bit deeper when you learn to do that. It's actually not that difficult to learn how to do, unless of course you're a woman, in which case you're not learning to do that.
In which case I go ahead.
Yeah, so it's not difficult to learn once you try it a few times, but it is something you're gonna have to teach yourself to do. For example, talking like a female voice is actually something that took me about a month to, experimenting to get it done.
The first trick I always do when I try to go deeper is just shifting my Adam's apple low, sort of more towards when I do this voice, for example, I have it shifted like just barely above my clavicle, which is as low as I can sort of normally get it, but it sounds fairly deep.
Throw the lever, Crunk.
Wrong lever!
Yeah, well, I mean...
Hello, voice!
Yeah, so, doing voices is one of those things that no amount of explaining it to you is going to do it 100%. Like, you could just pick it up and go. You've got to experiment, just like when you learn how to whistle for the first time. Like, you could see people doing it with their mouth, but you absolutely could not just pick it up and do it right away. You had to practice and try and try and try and try. Where do you come up with ideas? Like I said at the beginning of this thing, Duckles, I am constantly thinking about it in the back of my brain, and sometimes the Brownian motion of thoughts collides to make something that's decent. I keep my phone near me at all times so that I can like sit up and like quickly make a note on my phone about something so that I don't lose it or forget it or something like that. A lot of it comes to me when the brain is off. Like I'm doing mindless things like taking a shower, mowing the lawn, when I'm about to fall asleep. The times when your brain is shutting off the higher, thoughts, and you're just like, oh, the creative side's just flowing right now. Like I have had more than a few sleepless nights where I like laying down to bed and then I sit up and was like, God, I gotta write this down quick. And I write it down, write it down, and then I look up at the clock and it's 2 a.m. and I'm like, fuck. So, but in terms of where do you get the ideas from? Go out and like experience things. Like read books, watch movies, listen to music, get that creative juices flowing, and sometimes you'll find something is so good you have to steal it, or sorry, take inspiration from it.
Yes, of
Uh,
course, of course.
yeah, you just like, oh man, that would be a really cool idea. Or be like, no, I would have done it this way. I listen to podcasts. I listen to D&D podcasts and audiobooks during my drive and my lunch break, and sometimes, it's something that's just so good. Like I said, I devour urban fantasy settings like and Dresden Files, Iron Druid, World of the Lupi, stuff like that, the Nate Templeverse, and I also watched several documentaries about Prohibition, specifically so that I could set things properly, and that gave me all sorts of ideas, like the mounted cops,
Hmm.
things like
I
that.
mean, there's that story of, if you guys ever heard of the animated the show Ruby, RWBY.
Hmm.
The story of how the creator sort of came up with the world was they were at an IHOP and I think it was I think they like there was like a thing of ketchup that was like spilled on a napkin, and then they were like, all right, look at this. What if this
Yeah,
was a map?
I mean that do kind of be like it sometimes. Like, hey, what if? I mean, like I said, my game started off with the only reason my game got off the ground at all from just being a concept was, hey, what if mob bosses made a deal with Faye? That's it. Like, they got the documentary part about like speakeasies and stuff. I was like, hey, what if they could like magically conceal their speakeasies? And I was like, yeah, that's so ingenious. Like, okay, this deserves to be told. Let's make it happen. Uh, and everyone's talking about Monteune. Good job, bot.
All right,
Uh,
Monty. Yeah.
oh, here it is. Oh, everyone go to this for accents. Bardic.io. That's the one where you can like listen, repeat, and then compare. I use that a lot to learn. And they've got people who record like a whole bunch of shit.
Oh, I responded to the wrong message. I just sent a message in the chat trying to respond to Duckle's question about books to recommend.
Oh yeah.
But yeah,
It
so
depends on your
yeah,
setting too, for books.
yeah. Isaac Asimov, I'm a huge fan. Currently reading Caves of Steel. There's a not super well-known author that I really, really like her works. Eden Baudich. She wrote the series called The Young Inventors Guild, which is about 5 children taken from their homes from around the world to a farm in Dayton, Ohio. And the only things that connect them are that their parents are all brilliant scientists, they are all brilliant scientists, and they all know a mysterious poem called The Strange Round Bird.
Mm-hmm.
And
That
that's it.
sounds interesting. I'm gonna recommend something entirely different. Uh, in terms of getting inspiration, it kind of depends upon what your setting is. So, like, I'm doing urban fantasy, so I find urban fantasy settings. But I also like sci-fi and things like that. I'm going to recommend everyone that you read Terry Pratchett's entire works.
Thank you very much. I 100% agree.
Discworld is amazing and deserves more exposure to the younger generations.
The room that I sit in.
Also, everything has been recorded in audiobook form, so you don't even have to read it. There's also Patricia C. Reedy, Wrede, has made a series called The Enchanted Forest Chronicles, which is it's kind of a kid's book. There's not a lot of serious stuff in there, but it's like such a send up of every like Disney trope or like classical fairy tale trope. Like the princess runs away because she doesn't want to get married to the prince, and she becomes like the captive of a dragon willingly. And it's like, oh, it all goes from there. There's also a great, I don't know if it's actually a book because I have the, what's it called when they collect all of it in omnibus. I have an omnibus of it. It's What If Artificer, but like small children. It's called Hollow Fields. It's I don't know if it's a book, but because this is like a manga, but it's like a 3-volume collection, and I got the Hollow Fields the omnibus, and it's what if artificers, but like what if Hogwarts, but for artificers and small children, or not artificers, but like mad scientists. So, yeah, Nigel Planer, definitely good. For the Discworld one, Duckles. Yeah, but I would definitely recommend Hollow Fields for anyone who's interested in becoming or playing an artificer, because it's like so good for inspiration. Yes, Hollow Fields. Just like that, Edward.
Yeah. There's another author that I highly recommend, Jasper Ford, who wrote a book called The Air Affair, which is basically it's a parallel universe of Earth, but there are so many differences. And an example of this is that there are, in this world, crime and like the world and stories are very different, and characters in books are like their own worlds, and there's a whole district of the police called like literary police, where they have to, like, if someone's trying to steal a character from a story, they have to go in there and stop the person from kidnapping that character, for example. It's kind of like, imagine Inkheart, but even more broad, kind of bizarre, incredibly fun mystery series. And the reason it's called The Air Affair is because it's sort of centered around Jane Eyre.
I also mentioned all of the urban fantasies I'm involved in. Dresden Files.
Yes.
Dresden Files, The World of the Lupi, which is it's kind of like my setting, but set in modern day. So I drew a lot of inspiration for World of Lupi for like, so in World of Lupi, they have a magical crimes division, and they also have like a list of very specific spells that are admissible evidence in court. So they're like very specific rituals and things that can actually be used. So they have police procedure for detecting traces of magic on the scene and stuff like that. So I drew a lot of influence from them on how to do magical police force. I really love the Iron Druid Chronicles because it's a great like off the wall look at gods in the modern setting. I also am right now I'm doing the Phantom Queen Diaries, which is part of the Nate Temple universe. Which is modern magic, but also kind of hidden world, which is a cop-out, in my opinion, but, whatever. Other great books on my shelf, let's see. I super loved, there's this series, I doubt you can find it most places, because I found it at a con, but it's called Game Over by Jade Woodruff, and it's like the guy is part-time student, full-time gamer. He's having trouble keeping his grades up, but he wishes he could replace his schoolwork with video games. And if he beats the game, he passes the test. And then someone grants his wish, and so now everything he does has like video game stats and things like that. This was before the whole like Sword Art Online thing blew up. Isekai,
Ready Player One, and
alternate video game worlds. Yeah. There's also another great setting for like mixing technology and magic called Gold Digger, by Fred Perry. It's a really, really long-running comic. I believe that he has actually publicly released like the first 93 issues of his thing. And for everyone who's like, oh my god, all these books, I can't read fast, look for an audiobook of it, because you would be amazed like how fast you can devour a book in 30-minute drives. Edward, do you want me to? I'll let Bot talk for a little bit while I write down some titles for you.
I just sent a thing into the chat, which is a playtest release of some modern magic mechanics for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition.
I have been using that.
The city domain, the city domain cleric, the technomancer wizard, and the ghost in the machine war. I am definitely someone who gets very sucked into the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons specifically, and finding fun ways to flavor them, finding fun ways to sort of mix them around, pushing the boundaries of what is done, not min-maxing as much as like just telling interesting stories with fun rules and new bosses and such. Yeah. If anybody has there's any questions at all that I might be able to answer, I will happily. Favorite kind of cake? Swedish princess cake. I baked one for my mother's birthday and it was delicious.
If you don't say ice cream cake, you're a fucking heretic.
No, Swedish princess cake. Have you ever had it?
Not yet, but now I have to.
It is a cake. Favorite fast food place? Interesting question. I'll answer that after this. It is layered, like basic white vanilla cake, raspberry jam, pastry cream that's kind of like a thick custard, and then cake, jam, pastry cream, cake, jam. You mix the last third of pastry cream with a giant thing of whipped cream, and then cover the whole thing in a mountain of whipped cream to make a dome shape, and then a layer of marzipan over the whole thing with a marzipan flour on top. Also, angel food cake is amazing as well.
Yeah,
fast food place.
But does it have ice cream in it?
On the side, it does. Favorite fast food place? Never been to most of the fast food in America, so I would say Arzak in each. Favorite class I play? Excellent question. I've always been partial to martial classes. Paladins, fighters, barbarians. I just love being on the front lines, personally. Though I do love sorcerers as well. They're a lot of fun.
I started out playing rogues because I love being the skill monkey character. And rogues
yes, of course.
3.5 got more skill points than God. Recently I've gotten into playing artificers now that they're actually a thing that doesn't require XP to craft. And warlocks because I'm an edgy loser. I love the idea of being like you could be a caster against your will, because your patron just finds you and is like, hey, you're going to be a warlock now. Do I get a choice? No, you don't. Okay. Speaking of, before we answer Duckle's question, because I do want to do that, what's your current character? Like, just name one of them.
I have two that I love. I'm going to go with Vasily Skotina. He has been playing in a Curse of Strahd game, which is like for those of you who don't know, a vampire hunt themed grimdark setting.
Oh yeah, it's like Innistrad, but D&D.
Yeah. And his name is Vasily Skotina. He's 4'9". He's a very ripped Russian-themed elven man. He is just a nice guy. He's just a sweetheart. He's using a homebrew subclass of fighter called the Gladiator, where he's just showboats in front of his enemies and then grabs them and throws them or drags them across the ground, and it's just a fist fighter, and he's really fun. Yes, Elf Gladiator Putin is the exact way.
My current character, I'm playing an Inquisitor for a Dark Goddess in one game, in a Pathfinder game, but my current favorite character is I'm playing Cleo, who is...
The Cleo? Or
the Cleo.
Oh my god!
I'm Cleo, surprise. She is a cat. She is a black cat. Because this was before I found out that Blue's name was Cleo. Blue's cat's name was Cleo. Because I'd been doing a major kick on like Arabic characters. And so Cleo is a cat from the Scrublands. And there's actually Felids. Felid it's a custom race. It's not Tabaxi. They're actually like cats, but like on bipedal.
Yeah.
And she is an Way of the Astral Self monk. So yes, she has a stand, and yes, it has a name. Black cats have this once per day ability to give people disadvantage, and so of course black cat, bad luck. So her stand's name is Witchy Woman, because of course it is.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. We got a whole bunch of questions.
I'll speed run through some of the earlier ones. Toho series, never played anything. And
yes. Toho 11 is best game. Fight me.
Cool. How to retool in-use items. Talk to the players who are breaking the game, and then from there adjust with them.
Yeah, I mean, your first response should never be to blanket do anything. Going with a scalpel, not a hatchet.
Exactly.
Pull the player aside and say, hey, you're kind of breaking the game with this. Could you pull it back? And if they say no, that's when you have to put in your DM hat and say, hey, listen, this is disrupting the game, and disruptions can't be a thing. So one of these is going to have to go, either you or the item.
Yeah. Why do you think sorcerers are so unloved? I think that they have definitely they're not as strong as they could be, but I definitely think they fit the idea that they being
a free meta magic.
Exactly. That's
what do you mean
that's
unloved?
The thing. Edward had the question. So I think that they are actually fairly powerful and fairly creative with what you do. I get what you mean in the sense of they have fewer spell options and they're stuck with them when they select them.
Yeah, but you get like the difference between sorcerers and wizards is you get fewer options, but you can use any of them.
Yeah, and
so you build a list of stuff, and you could just pick from any of them at that moment.
And conceptually, if you think about it, like that makes sense with the sorcerer has a spell book that they analyze and read, and from there, with their vast knowledge, they cast spells. Sorcerers just innately have magic, and so they have fewer options, but the options that they do have, they can always cast, and they can bend them to their will.
Yeah.
With meta magic.
Favorite funny moments from your campaigns? Let's just do one each, because otherwise we'd be here all night. I have... there's a running joke that my players will manage to burn down at least one bar per campaign. Currently we are at 4 bars, 1 space station, and 4 bars, 1 space station, and an entire city.
For me, I have a lot. I'm going to have to go back to in terms of just pure humor. One time, so this is the post-apocalyptic urban fantasy theme. One time, they managed to get a very wealthy person's jet. They managed to steal it because the rogue rolled 2 nat 20s on sleight of hand in a row. It was insane. And they they got this jet that was full of alcohol. And they were about to go fight like the second to final boss of or the third to final boss of the campaign. And what they did was they just lit all of the alcohol on fire and threw it out of the plane. As
you do.
And just dropped this like like hundreds of thousands of dollars of expensive alcohol onto this deific envoy of an evil god. Just dropped this mountain of alcohol on top of it and did like 120 fire damage just off the bat.
Sorry. I'm going to cheat and break my own rules because I want to tell you about my most favorite RP moment in a character I've ever played. We were playing like this kind of like multinational anti-terrorist force. This was just after 9/11 when this campaign happened, so it was on everyone's mind.
Yeah.
And the terrorists were going to blow up a nuclear reactor in Europe, and one of us, the radiation suit that would be required to go in there was heavy armor. And I was playing a cleric, or not a cleric, it's D Tony Modern, so it's not a cleric, it's the wise hero. But I was the only one with heavy armor because I was going for the heavy armored cleric trope. So I took it, and my character, basically, even through the suit, they got radiation poisoning. And then they got, when they finally put the control rods back down, they realized that like the system automatically locked and sealed them in. So they basically like took off their helmet and they had this like heartwarming moment where they like just talked to the group and is like, okay, listen, we all know that I'm gonna die here, so let's talk to I'll tell you what to tell my family. And everyone's just like bursting into tears because we've been through a lot at this point, and this was a character death, and it was a really impactful character death. And so yeah, that was my favorite time ever, like in D&D, because it really sucks when your character dies, but boy, it was such a fulfilling thing. Favorite classless game or system? There's not. I don't know about classless necessarily, but have you heard of Lords of Gossamer and Shadow?
No.
So Lords of Gossamer and Shadow has no dice whatsoever. It's a diceless RPG. Where all of your stuff, whether you succeed or fail, is based entirely upon your bonuses and penalties of situations. It's kind of like a Planeswalker, like a Magic the Gathering Planeswalker scenario. But instead of planeswalking, you like walk the infinite stair and you like step through doors into different worlds. Or I guess Golden Sky Stories for a more lighthearted version of that. There are no dice rolling. It's the same situation again, but it's kind of like a more lighthearted storytelling version of that. Do you have any examples of diceless or classless?
Not really. 5th edition is really the main thing that I played.
Yeah. Templar Warden today asks how to balance taking notes and playing or DMing. They find it too distracting taking active notes. It shouldn't be. If you aren't the person who's the center of attention, you should have plenty of chances to scribble a note. It doesn't have to be like note-taking like you do in class where you write down every word the professor says. Just like scribble a shorthand like ask about cupcakes or cupcakes equals murder ? Recently my players one of my players found out that go to the opera was mob slang for do a hit on someone. And so now they have a note that says opera equals murder in their notes. It's just enough to remind them what's going on.
Yeah, I had a player who had twice as many like pages of notes as I had pages of the campaign notes for the whole campaign. That was funny.
Yeah, well, when you're a player, you write down literally everything that could conceivably be important.
Yeah, it was It was pretty fun. She's an excellent player. I'm excited to have her in the sessions.
So when do you have to go?
I have to go in 35 minutes.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I was gonna say I've got to leave for my thing at 5 as well. So, let's kind of wrap this up so that we have time to do our own things. So,
Yeah.
we'll say we'll cut it off at 1/2 past the hour. So about
All right,
another 4
cool. So,
minutes.
yeah, 4 minutes. I would like just like a little side note.
Mhm.
There's some very fun homebrew that I highly recommend people try out.
Oh, 5e homebrew is all good. There's nothing
yeah.
but bangers.
Yeah. There's one group, like a small company that does what's it called? They're called 2C Gaming. They're really good. They did a book called The Total Party Kill Bestiary. They're very fun, and they have I will have to say, Edward, it's not better than the garlic bread domain. Nothing is better than the garlic bread domain. Anyway,
Excuse, you're wrong. The plane of steamrollers. The demiplane of steamrollers is the best plane.
Question is, no, the garlic bread domain is as in the.
Oh, okay.
the
Yeah, okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah. Surprisingly, despite the fact that I have spent a considerable amount of time in New York, not do a New York accent for shit.
I could do
anyway,
a Philadelphia accent, but it'd be terrible.
But yeah, so I have a number of what was I saying? Oh yeah, there are a number of wonderful homebrew stuff, wonderful homebrew things that I've seen. Dragonflight by 2C Gaming is a supplement to Play as Dragons. And Epic Legacy is a series that they have on like going past level 20 to do stuff, and brought them up lightly. Grave Domain is absolutely incredible. I agree 100%.
Yeah, just being able to at any point say that crit didn't happen is such a game changer.
Yeah, and until the party just gets
yeah.
with adamantine armor.
Yeah. Yeah, and someone actually in my group made a swarm of bees thing where you just like summon bees from your hand. It was basically like acid splash, but instead of acid damage, it was poison. But yeah, like, yeah, I mean, 5e actually has some pretty good like internal quality control in terms of like when people submit homebrew stuff to the world. There's the community itself has some pretty good quality control, and like this needs to be balanced. So yeah, a lot of the 5e stuff, like I said, the Felis race,
that's going to be in very specific campaigns, of very specific zero seriousness campaigns. That's going to be fun. Oh, Felis, Felis. Sorry.
Yeah, here you go.
Yeah.
You basically play a cat, but
I love that
cat. It's great.
Yeah.
I'm having so much fun.
I want to make a Where Tarrasque.
I actually found someone had made an entire like maps and everything module where you go inside a Tarrasque as the dungeon.
That is incredible.
That's wild, right?
That is incredible. I love that.
It is. Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah. I'm gonna make. I'm excited for my homebrew thing to come out. But yeah, it's time for us to.
Yeah, it is time for us to call this. Please, if you want to continue this conversation, go over to the #Tabletops channel and talk more, because I'm a nerd and Bot is an even bigger nerd, and we all threw you under the bus there. And
no, you're right.
All of us in this chat are here because you wanted to talk about D&D and world building and nerdy topics like that. So, come and join us and talk in there, where we all break the game and have fun. Thanks everyone. I'm Shadow.
I'm Bot.
And
And-
this has been an overly sarcastic production. I mean, thanks a bunch for joining us. Have a nice night, everyone.
All right, yeah. Y'all take care.